What I'm looking at today is what's generally known as a Gamo Sport sight. The latest one. These are fitted to Air Arms S200, S400 MPR, BSA target rifle. In the States there's a Daisy Avanti, Virart use them. They're pretty universal. They're also very cheap and not particularly well made. When they originally came out made by Gamo Sport in the 1980s, 90s, they're actually a very good sight. Of course, the design was then transferred to a Far Eastern factory, and they are what you might call variable in quality. I bought two of these for my MPR rifle. The first one had a considerable slope downwards. The thread was alright, but the carrier inside was at a ridiculous angle. I had drilled that straight and re-tapped it. I also bought another one which was even worse. The guide rod underneath was completely drilled out of place and the whole thing moved around. What I have done in this is to make the whole 9.5 standard handshut, so re-tapped it to take a proper handshut sight. So it's usable, but the main problem is it moves, as you probably see from that. There's also a fair amount of backlash, but there's not much you can do with that without replacing all the internals. I mean, these things are £25 at the NSRA shop, a little bit more on eBay, so you can't expect a great deal, but you can do some work on them. So I'll deal with this movement later. But another problem was it wouldn't sit down flat on the rifle. There was a gap on this side. The problem with that is that the clamp was nothing like a sharp point. It certainly wasn't the same shape as the handshut's dovetails. So what I did with that, if you take it apart, mind the springs as they drop out, is to actually put this in a vise, hold it in a vise and then file it until there's a decent sharp edge on there, and then it will fit. Also, it wasn't very tightly clamping, so the next thing you have to do is to remove this screw and the springs and file this part down so that the gap here is a little bit less. That gets you somewhere near. The problem then is when you put it back together again and you tighten the screw up, there's actually a fair amount of up and down movement in the dovetails. So the last thing I did with that was to get a piece of brass shim. It's about the thickness, slightly thicker than a tobacco tin, but I suppose it's about 15 thou. But just find something that will fill the gap, and then you place it in the gap between the clamp and the body. Then as you tighten it up, it sits between the two, and the vertical movement is, well, if you take up all the slack then you won't have any. So at this point you've got a sight which will clamp to a decent handschuts type dovetail. Now to deal with the movement here. I have seen some write-ups on making some brass plates with precise holes in to put underneath this cover. The cover itself is probably a better fit than the body quite often, which, as I said, I did have one which was drilled through the full thickness and it just moved around. But then I thought, well, maybe if I just clamp this somehow, that would stop it moving. So I decided that if I found a washer about 30 diameter and used the the thread to tighten it up, then it would lock the whole thing to the cover, and that would make it much more rigid. So the first thing to do is to get the hole, which I bought as an 8mm hole, to fit this. But if you've ever tried drilling a hole in a washer, you'll find it's very difficult to hold, and it's just, the drill is just going to grab it. So what I've got here is a tapered reamer. I call it my biggerator, which we can put in the hole, and a 9.5mm drill, just so I can check for size. Now this is fairly thin brass, so it does actually cut fairly quickly. Doesn't need a great deal of tapering to get it to the right size. Over there. So here we have the washer, the sight, screw the two together, just enough to hold it. That is absolutely rock solid, that's not going to move anywhere. Obviously if you want to adjust the sights, you need to loosen it slightly and turn it to the correct click and just nip it up again. There's no problem with the adjustable collar for the blinder, that still works perfectly well. And with the fettling the clamp, packing out the clamp and putting the washer on there, that's probably as rigid a sight as you'll get for a club rifle, and I'll probably save myself £300 by not replacing it with an actual Anschutz one. I hope that helps. It may not comply with all the rules of the USA Sporter fraternity, but in the UK that's absolutely fine, no problems.